So what is Chinese medicine's point of view on what happens after a pandemic? In history, have things returned back to normal, or have society transformed into something new?
Okay, this time we're probably going to review. There's big issues I want to address that. So there's some people said the pandemic is the enemy of humanity, but also is the push hand for the history. So I sort of agree with that statement, but at the same time, I don't really think pandemic is just simply enemy. I feel it's about the showing the humanity have the dark aspect, and how can we face to the Tao, to understand the Tao, what is the yin yang, and how is the earth function on that in a yang balance state. So pandemic definitely is the hands or the elements to help to balance in between the earth and the life. And the life could be the animal life or there any other like plant life, and in between the human. So that's why we have been addressed that issues in the past, but this time I like to kind of address one of the questions, which is about the ability for study. So if we can look into about the history of the pandemic. For example, we are actually in the pandemic. So this big pandemic spreading almost about the all of the world. They're already half year, but doesn't look like they've been stopped. It's just continue marching on. If there's going to continue develop or getting worse, or because people just said, some people like Mr. Trump said, wow, the virus going to certainly stop. So whether we think that is the case or there's going to continue. So I'd like to see if we can start learning from the history, and also to see has our the learning ability from of the humanity. I want to address that because I feel that's quite important issues, and so I will bring that question to everybody who are joining the podcast. So to ask everybody, how do you feel, or how do you think the learning ability of the humanity? Is that high or low? That is a question to everybody. We need to reflect and then to be able to understand ourselves. Otherwise, how can we really bring our life forward? As the Chinese medicine, you mentioned about how the Taoist to deal with pandemic. I'd like to see if we're talking about the Chinese medical doctor as what we are. We always need to look over all of the patients when the patients come in. So we need to diagnose their whole body rather than just like only the nose, only the eyes, because they're all connected. So we need to look into that person as the complicated complexity system to be able to find out what is wrong, to be and can make really good diagnosis, and then find the disease history and what's the reason caused, and then we can really make the right diagnosis and to be able to improving the health. So for humanity, the same. If our human, if we we are the species for the earth, and then if we are benefit for the earth or not, we need to have a look into our whole history. So that's why this time I like to go through that history with everyone to look into how is the pandemic situation, how much our human can easily forget, how much we learn from that and big pandemic. So I was just bring up there are 11 big pandemic on their very famous events, but actually doesn't really count the small one in the local area. Because, for example, in China, they have at least 321 epidemic in China. But some of them, a couple of them are really developed into global. But so that's why I don't count those small ones. If we are looking at the first one is Greek arson. That's the Black Plague. That was BC 430 years to start from that, and then to the 427. It's almost about the 3 years, and about half of their population died in Athens. And the city has been really been destroyed because patients have the high temperature. The body is super smelly, running the dirty liquids, and then people are so uncomfortable and then painful, and then running around on the street and then thirsty, and then some of them are just kind of died on the street. So, and that kind of epidemic actually also caused the war. That was the happening during the war and through the war. So the second, the big famous pandemic is called the Antony plague, which is in ancient Rome on the AD 164 to 180 years. So it's almost continue running for 20 years.
Wow.
So because their soldier, their Roma soldier went to the east to invading them, and then they're coming back. So they bring the disease back to Rome. So there's two Roma emperor and get infected. So they died. One is on the 169. This one died. Another one is died on the 180. So after 9 years, there start outbreak again, and the death is about 5 million. So that is also it's because the war of the Bosnia war, because that war lasted for 2 years. So the third one, and I just list that, and later on we are going to look into what is the cost, and what is the timeline. So the third one is called the Justina plague, and that is in the AD 541 years to the 542. So that is the Byzantine emperor. So they are doing their invasion to the West Europe. So that's why on their 541 years, so their plague is already start in Egypt. So that's why, and then there are outbreak, and then move to the Turkey. So in this pandemic, the dead people is about 230,000. There's almost about the quarter of the Italian Rome people died. And then during that time, their outbreak, their property, and then internal war as well. So that pandemic bring the Roman Empire completely collapsed. So the fourth one is they're called Black Death, very, very famous on the 14th centuries. This one lasts from 1,347 years to the 1,351 years. So it's lasts for 8 years. So that the whole world been infected. So in Europe, there's about 50 million people died. In the whole world, is about 75 million people died. So that cause why does the pandemic upgrade to start with? The start with about that plague brought by the soldiers' ship, and then so because the soldier has been and they lose their war and then come to the city, so that's why the plagues come too. After during that, actually within the 40 years, there are outbreak again. So that is really have caused from the kind of trade road. They're covered about the from Asia to Russia, and then to West Europe, to the North Africa, and also to the middle of the Asia, to Turkey, and then to Italy, to the Russia. So that's why it's kind of a huge and a long period about the pandemic, which is super black. So because when the people mention that in the history, they just said the dead body everywhere. So also it's very typical, those kind of pandemic, it's infected very much on the from the city to the countryside as well, because in the previous 3-1, it's much more happening in the city, but this time it covered many places. So the fifth one is we call the American continent pandemic. That was happening on the 16th centuries. So this one is very much linked with American Indian death. So there's 5 million of the American Indian deaths. So because that is very interesting cultural events, because European bring them all of the different disease and virus, to the American continent, because American continent and hasn't got the European history have so much exercise through the virus. So because they are quite secluded, because those people living in the quiet nature, land nature area, they are not really have a immune system be exercised to those kind of virus. And so it's funny enough, there's a stories. They said when the European kind of a soldier in a fight to the local, the Indians. So the Indian people find, those European people had a gun because they don't have a gun. They are almost like Aboriginal people equivalent, like Australia. So, and then they find that the gun, it is powerful, but there's not very easy to be accurate to shoot. So that's why the local people build up a very strong, the wall, and then they will protect themselves. So there's one battle is Spanish people, and then they try to break their wall to go into the city, and then go into their area. They cannot. So, and then they just continue and wait, because they're the Indian people. They can use their old weapons. But interesting, they lost the war. They wait the second time. The local people will continue take them back, and then they try to re-enter. And then they find this very interesting, why people have no resistance from that, the local people. So when they get into this, to the area, because when they break the wall, go into the area, they find the people dead all of the places, because it's the virus. So that's one of the reasons. This very, very wise race, with that they understand, astrology and the land and all kind of, have a very super perceptions and to the natures. But this kind of quite advanced race, only in that kind of like a 20, 30 years, it is almost disappeared. Yeah, it is also because the pandemic and the virus, because they have no kind of immune system to it. So the partly, the historian said, because there's lots of virus and across the boundary from the chickens or the or the animals to the human. But because the Indian, they don't have those kind of house animals, because they're living in the nature. So that's why their immune system never really been exercised to this type of their, house animals, which is the human being now is doing the pig, like a factory feed pig. So that's why quite lots of the virus jump up to the human. It's like the from the pig. Or from the chickens, like birds flu, that is the case. Okay, that's the fifth one. And the sixth one, that's called the Milan big pandemic. That is that's the year of 1629 to the 1631. So the death people is 2 million people died. It's also is because there's a 30 years war zone. So the German and the fight is Italian. So that's why during that war zone, so the German soldiers transmit the virus to the Italian, and also when they come to the Italian soldier and the Italian soldier, and then you transmit to the local people. So there are seven. The number 7 pandemic is called the London plague. So that is the year 1665 to 1666. So that's also 100,000 people died in London. So almost London's the 25% of the people disappeared. They're spreading very fast. With only 1 week, the death is already above the 10,000. So that's why the London city, they're called as like a death city. The pandemic, the last year, London had a big fire. So because that big fire burned down all of the infected houses, so London actually rebuilt from that, ruined. The reason they said is also the ceiling from the ship coming in. So the number 8 and then is the French Marseille big place. That is also 100,000 people died, and then that is the plague is very quick come in and very quick goes away. Is due to the government take very restrict and the methods. So to lock down very quick. So therefore, because they use the law, so who broken the lockdown, who going to have a death sentence. So that's why they are only last for two years, from the 1720 to 1722. And the number 9, they called Moscow Black Plague. That is 1771 years. So there's also, they took very restrict the kind of lockdown. So that's why it's not last too long. So number 10 is the one of the biggest plague, the pandemic in the year of 1885 to 1950. It is a start from Yunnan and then China, south part of China, and then they transform into Indian, and then to American, and then to Europe, and then to Africa. So within about their 10 years, they transmit 60 countries, 77 harbors. So the death rate is also 100,000 people. The 11th, the big pandemic is recently, what people already mentioned, they called Spanish flu. Funny enough, because recently we heard there's lots of oral fight in between about their how to name their Corona-19 from China, because the Americans try to make that pandemic called the Wuhan virus. But actually, their historian said, in fact, we cannot make their as as the country or city name. It cannot reflect the real history, because so-called Spanish flu is originally come from American military compound. So that is the original what's happening. It's a start from 1918. So there's about the millions of people died. So, and then that is very, very huge infection on the whole, it's really on the whole world. So, and then the very interesting phenomenon is that big flu hasn't really heard much to mention that, because when they start to transmit, they have so much death because they were forbidden to mention it. Why? It's because it's the First World War. That's during that time. So that's why, because they want to soldier not frightening about that flu death. So they're forbidden to mention anything linked with that. So they want to soldier fight, no fear. So that's a very funny kind of phenomenon, that some of the people that said the deaths actually could be 25 million to 1 billion. So that's that's kind of like we leave to the historian to discuss that. But I like to mention that. Why I mentioned that 11 really big cases, because from the learning process, we need reflect. As a human, if we really stay, we are in the big pandemic, how can we come out? What can we learn from the history? So I just want to look at, take everyone into that history. We look into from the first one to the second one, the time in between is about 500 years. From the second big one to the third one is the in between is 350 years. So that the third one in between the fourth one is about 300 years. But after that, so, and then we notice that, so gradually, and then the time in between each pandemic has become the year become shorter and shorter. For example, in between the 6 to the 7 is only 30 years in between. From the 7 to 8 is 60 years. From the 8 to 9 is from 9 to 10 is 16 years. So from the and then from the 9 to 11, incredibly, we noticed that. So the Spanish flu, because it lasts so long and so big, they're almost like almost kind of we call it the same time covered for the previous one. So that's what we need to see. The pandemic actually, they're almost like cycles. But how could we human, if our medical service develop, our technology and then science develop, we should be really take care of ourselves much better. Because if we looked into lots of articles that, our death rate and then reduced, and then because and the life is getting better, take care of much better, the baby deaths much less. That's maybe true, but on the other hand, and why there's the big pandemic can get less and the frequency and then get much faster. So for example, that is the one thing I just want to get you to notice, and that's very important. The second one I want to draw the attention is about, if you look at all of this pandemic, what is combination on the social event is the war zone, or some of them that basically so obviously, and then they start an outbreak because the war zone, because the soldier and then traveling from the one country to the others. So that's why they bring the virus come back to their own country, and then to start from their another war, then they start spreading. So that's that is the one phenomenon we really need to take notice. From the many pandemic in China, I was also looking into it. They tend to be almost like they happen almost like a sister events with the war. Well, also with the natural disaster. When the natural disaster happening, either the pandemic happened before the natural disaster, so the deaths and so much, and then there's the natural disaster, or they happen after natural disaster, and also property, people's massive suffering about the no food. So obviously, from Chinese medicine point of view, that means their immune system is very weak. And also linked with war zone, when the people fight, their consciousness and they are, cross the boundary, and then their life, and they're not hygienic. So that's also all kind of social phenomenons. So that's the second, the one we need to notice is pandemic very directly linked with the war. The third aspect we need to notice is about the trading. So when the trading happening, there's there all the boundary of the city and the country start break. It's almost like it's no longer that quarantine as like a natural quarantine on the boundary, but because there's people start traveling and visiting each other, so they're very easy bring the sense from one city to the others, especially when the ships and the airplane and then move on. That's why there's happening much more quick. So now that's the three. If we looked, it's very much in common with those big pandemic. But of course, that's what we call, it's almost like the pandemic bring lots of deaths, and then it's a horrible sense to show the human the dark past, and also it's like they bring the life to the end. But interestingly, there's the other part. We see there's always a pattern, because now we're working on the pattern. When the big pandemic happening, they're almost like a big events break all the circles or cycles is opening up to move on to the new scenario. For example, in Europe, there's the big plague on the 14th centuries, which is 50,000 million people dies. After that, so there are lots of all the system and all the boundary has been break through. So people the population largely declined. So that's why the new thinking and the new conscious and new construction for the societies are happening. For example, the Catholic Church, their authority after that, Black Plague in Europe is completely lost, because people pray for the the Catholic Church to help or to protect them, but unfortunately, instead of the church help, they watching the experience, even the head of the church get infected, and also the priests largely infected, and then instead of to listen to the church the bell, there's lots of shouting said collecting the dead body, collecting the dead body. So that's why people start have rethinking their belief system. So this is the one sense from the the religion aspect, to bring the new religions, a new way of thinking. On the other hand, that the European Black Blades, they bring their slave, their farmer like slave system completely broken, because there are so many people dead. There's very little labor to be able to work on the land. So the landlord try to make sure the crops are still growing, their land is still to carry on to cultivate. So they have to pay the money to kind of hiring the free laborers. So that's why that is the new class start appeared. And also they have, there's some of the landlords that have to rent out their land to the neighbors' survivals they could do. So that's why they bring the society, how to redistribute their wealth. So that's is the big kind of a revolution on the societies. So also because of the city has been such attacked by the plague, so there, the authority, or maybe the mayor and then the head of the rulers, so they running around from their city to the countryside for the survival. So that's why the citizens, they cannot go away because they don't have a car, and then they have to stay. Because they stay, and then they start organize and to themselves how to survival, how to rearrange the city's management. So that's why there's an independent political force start to come to the surface, which is citizens self-organized. So after that, that's the huge, and that's interesting. All of this social structure change, and then people's their mindset change, and then they see their own power to exercise, to hold their own right come back. So that's why from that pandemic, they get the beginning of their renaissance to start to happening. So their art and all of that is start from that like a very deadly crisis from humanity. So from that point, we can see there all of this pandemic. After that, the history almost had been pushed to move on. The broke through the old system, and then bring the new system, the new way of their organized, new way of life. So that's one of the reasons I like to mention that our situation right now, and because we see the American and hasn't really doing the very straightforward about their lockdown and their quarantine policy. So that's why the figures about the infectionness and then death rate start rising up. I can see if we are not really learning from history, so that the pandemic, the continue to develop is become very, very possible. But also there's riot happening in American, in the whole countries, and also start spreading to the Europe. So that also is the one of the we call it fight and competition, and it's another type of the war to have the it's already start. And the other potential war from right now, if you look at when the American nuclear ship get infected, so that's why they have been stopped for not doing the military action. When we heard that news, so I can feel that is almost the sign, like virus use this to stop the human to be able to fight each other. It's like bring the stop button, said look, stop, to have look into their situation, be peaceful, learn how to reflect, to be peaceful. But unfortunately, and then now when their sense over, and the country and the state and hasn't stopped the military. I just find this very interesting to hear news. So, and then Russia and American and then also European, the soldiers, they're still kind of doing their exercise to prepare if there's a war, and also Korea, and then that the situation in Asia also have a very intense. They are kind of a sort of a war. I would think, because anything is bring about their fight is not harmonious, not collaborate. It's a type of the war. So if we get those kind of intensive, the human against each other or fight each other. So we need to really be careful what we're going to be. Are we going to, through the pandemic, to learn? So we already have the death. If we create sort of the human physical war, so what we're leading to, so the more people die, right? So, and then the more kind of people to be wiped up, and how our human being can really learn from that. Or is that because the human being still like children hasn't really learned until really to fight to the death, and then those kind of death kind of habit, the fight habit, to be able to stop and then to learn how to build up from the ruined the city. So that has already happened in the history. So let's we look into that. I had a feeling that the virus is like a macro system. That system is like a parasite. So they're hooked on the human system and then to develop. But also we have, the political parasites. What's the political parasites is the political leaders. So they are supposed to be and carry their responsibility to help people to be able to learn how to respect, how to kind of harmonious to living together, rather than have a war zone on the boundary and have a war. So that's why I really just want to look through that all of the history, and we are coming to another huge pandemic. I'm not quite sure that kind of the death rate will be over the Spanish flu or not, because that's the First World War. And our human being, some of the leader, for example, they have a very, very strong military force, very strong high technique, but they have a really high death and a high infectionness. Instead of to be able to look into how to protect their own country and then to increasing the health, instead of doing all of this to take care of the life, but now it's about talking about it's blamed as all the other people doing something wrong to them, and also try to increasing the self power, and then to get elected, and then to also show the muscles on the military, and then try to go into other country to punish and to the other countries. So that is, and it's really make ourselves to say, if our human being really want to bring the peace for this species, we are one of the species of the earth. So to look like our social system and the so-called the leader for the social system, how can we bring the much better way? Is first we need to look into the history, to learn, to reflect, to get the self-check, rather than behavior like a very nostalgia and then really, really sick, and then kind of like crazy patients. Like we always know, if people not really mature, so they are very easy to make insecure, and then to blame the other people, cause their own troubles. So that's very, we call this as a very kind of a immature, and these, that's kind of psychological immature problems. So that's one of the reasons I want to kind of through the Chinese medicine to look into that. So why, in the ancient wisdom, we are emphasize people to be calm, to connecting, and then to practice, cultivate your own energy, to be able to feel, and then to reflect from your heart, and then you will be much more harmonious as the species with the other species to living on the earth. But now, if we would look at the history, all of that events is already telling and then to shouting to us. So that's why let we through that pandemic have a very, very good review to be able to be clearly to say why our human being it is, and how can we choose the right leaders, and then for the for the majority people, for everybody, we have rights, we have a free will. So, but we need to look into the situation. What's the reason bring this pandemic come? And why this pandemic hasn't been stopped? So, for example, China now in Beijing, they find quite a number of cases, and then for the infectionists, because China has been very, very almost like zero cases, but certainly recently they find quite a lot. And then they looked into the reason that they find there's a virus in the fish. And there was a fish and been frozen and shipped from Europe. So that's why, and then people very quickly reflected, said, look, if only China clear up the virus, it doesn't count. And then we need to have the whole world to have a, solidarity, and then to unify and together. And there are other countries also to be able to go through the painful to lock down, and then to be able to reflect, to calm down, to clear up. It's take care of the people. It's not to only thinking about the material, because why we're so much looking into how to develop the material. So the human needs to be find out material is only one aspect. If we will only want to develop an economic and material, we forgot and our mind, our love. So that's why it's bring about that's the serious lessons for us have to look into it. And why we attract this situation is not somebody else caused that. It's ourself, deeply psychic levels need to look into it. So, and then now I'd like to come back to look into our human learning ability. So I want to see.
Before we go on, could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so you're sort of saying in a way that the virus's ability to thrive has a relation to the energetics that is functioning inside the human body. So if we've got all these energetics of anger and fighting and war, then that's going to make the virus be able to survive longer or get more intense because it feeds off that energy almost.
Yes, correct. What you said is correct. So that's why we need to say, why we really would like to conquer the other race? Why we like to fight? Because we want to show we have a big muscles, we can control. And then what is the deep reasons? Because that deep reasons is desire. Our human beings desire, and then they want to, they want to have too much land, too much material, too much kind of a need. So there's many deep reasons we need to reflect and then to learn. Otherwise, we were just kind of trapped into that cycles. So, you mentioned that we better talking about the cycles. Yes. So that's one of the big learning curve I would like to suggest from here. So the Tao is really to guide us to see what is the deep and deep reasons. So because the Tao is also always energetically make the yin and yang balance. So and then we can keep alive here. But if there's not balance, the balance has been kind of broken. That's one of the reason the big pandemics are happening. So that's why instead of just talking about, yes, we eat this and then we don't eat that, it's not just about the eating what and then wearing the mask. Yes, wearing mask is very important. But and then what is the deep energetic levels we need to learn, and what with our conscious levels to cause that. So that's the deep learning curve. I don't really think I got all of the answers, but I want to share my kind of thinking and my reflection. But first, I will suggest that our Chinese medicine lovers or and the people really interested in ancient wisdom. So we need to increasing our learning ability. The learning ability is we are not drop the history. The history always show there's certain pattern of our human, and then our habit. So because those habits and then they reflect some deep issues, we need to look into. Otherwise, how can we make progress?